The Poplar Grove papers were discovered just a few years ago. They were in, I think, a garage in the attic of the house known as Poplar Grove, and one of the Hemsley daughters had married into that family, the Emerys. And as a result, some of the Hemsley family papers ended up in the Emery family collection. And so one of them was a partial inventory of Mrs. Hemsley. And of course, there were a lot of Mrs. Hemsleys over time, but we looked at it, and it was a list of the items in her bedroom and some of the downstairs rooms. And it was undated and it was incomplete, but Heather, when I sent it to her, she was able to look at the items and try, knowing what the items were used and how they would have been presented in the house, able to break it into a room-by-room inventory, even though there was no room designations on the document. And from her analysis and more nuanced understanding of what would be where, she was able to determine that the document actually was referencing Cloverfields and probably the third Mrs. Hemsley, Nancy Tillman Hemsley, who married the Colonel in 1797.
So what was super exciting about that that fragment of paper that Sherri found was, as she saw it, it's amongst lots of other papers, and it really has no, it was just a piece. And she's like, kicks it over and says, you might want to be interested in this. It's it's a bunch of stuff in someone's listing of someone's house, and it was one of those pieces that just kept pushing back and saying, you need to look at me more closely. And as Sherri and I talked, there were so many Mrs. Hemsley. Which Mrs. Hemsley could this possibly be? That it was referenced in the document. But what was really fantastic about it is that it is by room to a point. So, but in the parlor and a dining room specifically noted in an entryway with these objects in those spaces. So, as Sherri mentioned, what I did was take that list, we transcribed it, and then started comparing it to the Colonel's final inventory for his household. And and initially some of the pieces are mundane. You've got set chairs, you've got dining room tables, which everyone's house has. But it was as the pieces started matching up more and more, running through that list and then highlighting on the Colonel's inventory. And it was really when I finally got to the garret and the 3 servants' beds show up on both lists, and 4 glass salts, and some of these really specific numbers and objects. And the other one that was kind of the clincher were the number of swing glasses, which are your mirrors that are on your dressing tables. And once those all matched up, there was just too many places where it was matching up perfectly with the numbers and the objects, that it became apparent that this was probably a very early walk through the house, probably right after the Colonel has passed away. Mrs. Hemsley's room we kept calling it Mrs. Hemsley's inventory, because that was the first line on it, was Mrs. Hemsley. It was hard to figure out what those couple of the words were. It starts off with her room, and again, from the work that Sherri's done in the archives of finding the early letters back and forth to the Tillman in Philadelphia, and reading those, you realize that Mrs. Hemsley is quite ill most of the time they're married, and you get the nuances in the letters that obviously when they were first married they're sharing a bedroom and a bed, and it comes through in the letters, and then later on as she's more and more sickly, you get the sense that she's moved into her own bedroom, and that again makes sense as you see this listing that she's in her own bedroom as he has now passed away. And then it runs through the rooms. The rooms upstairs are numbered number 1, number 2, number 3. No delineation of which rooms, but then you get down to the parlor, the dining room, the entryway. And then it actually stops with the dining room. The dining room is not noted specifically, but you see they're in the dining room. What's fascinating and harder with the Colonel's inventory is they have not gone by room, which would have been lovely. And instead for his inventory, they have grouped the furnishings together. So all the beds are together, all of the chairs are together, all of the case pieces are together. So that's where this fragment of an inventory that was started is really important for this house, because it gives us those rooms and starting at least a place to start with in 1812 of what's in what rooms. It's fascinating research, and it's very rewarding, and that's where, again, the whole team of the here at Cloverfields is fascinating, because everybody has their own part of it. But as a team of incredible experts, it's amazing to see what's being pulled together, and the full picture that's being painted is really rewarding, I think.
I remember a couple of weeks ago, you were going through the inventory and you found ice tongs and pails, and you're like, oh,
there's a nice house.
There's a nice house. And that was the same week that the archaeologist found a nice house and a dairy. So we're like, yeah, we know it's there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's just interesting that, we were looking at the description of the items that are in the very same ice house that they found just a few days later.
Yeah. And even the conversation this morning was the dairy itself, again, the ice house and dairy combined, was the fact that, someone made a comment, oh, there wasn't anything in the inventories. I'm like, oh, I said, yes, there is. There's a whole list of dairy objects that were in the dairy, and obviously all together, as well as we know from the archival research, are the people very much associated who were working in the dairy. The colonels in the family history there talks about anyone coming to visit the household. There was an older couple here who were servants in the household who you always checked in with. But the woman of that was always in the dairy, and it notes specifically you had to go find her, that she was really, her realm was the dairy and taking care of the milk products and the cream and the butters, and producing this for the household as well as probably for extra sale in the neighborhood. I'm super excited about getting to the artifacts that the archaeologists are finding, because again, as I'm going through the inventories, I know there's creamware with green feathered edge. Well, I'm pretty sure I know what that looks like and have pulled images of what probably that is, but I have no doubt that the archaeologists have found some of that. So it's now going back and working with them and going, okay, here are the couple pieces I want to see, or again, also seeing what they're pulling out, finding as artifacts, and then able to identify what those pieces are in the household. To be able to start putting those, both the archival research back together with the actual artifacts, is going to be really exciting as we move down the road.